This is passage 2 of Psych Soc of the section bank volume 2 of the AAMC. Self-esteem proxy refers to the tendency to use an individual's self-esteem to judge that individual's social worth. Studies show that individuals with high self-esteem, or HSE, are more likely to be perceived as possessing desirable personality traits compared to those with self-esteem, or LSE. To explain the reliance on self-esteem proxies, researchers suggest that making quick judgments based on perceived self-esteem is necessary for social success. So the researchers are saying this, that high esteem is important for social success. So let's highlight that. According to the sociometer theory, an individual's self-esteem reflects their history of rejection and acceptance. For example, in familial and interpersonal relationships, and is a gauge of social success. Okay, so this is what they are claiming, or like this is what they hypothesize. So it's always good, like when you're in these passages, is to hypothesize what the researchers are trying to do, and so just let that guide you. Studies indicate that self-esteem proxy has interpersonal consequences. LSE individuals report concealing their LSE in romantic relationships to avoid rejection. Furthermore, LSE individuals report concern that their professional skills and performance may be undermined at the workplace because they are less likely than HSE individuals to highlight their performance and skills in work interactions. Study 1 assessed whether self-esteem proxy was still used to judge target individuals when direct information was available from the target's behavior and emotions. Participants read a narrative description of a male or female target. The first paragraph described the target as having either HSC or LSC. The second paragraph described the target as either winning or losing a scholarship and the target's emotional reaction to the experience. So they kind of did two independent variable setups right here. One with like showing emotion, and then just from like real narrative, and like whether or not their emotions from like question number 1 of passage 2. So it's saying, based on the first paragraph, which term best describes self-esteem proxy? So if we go back in paragraph 1, they say that like the tendency to use an individual's self-esteem to judge that individual's self-worth. So basically, it's when a person uses their self-esteem to assess how their social worth is. So kind of like a way of like thinking, you could say. So let's look at our answer choice and see if it lines up the most what we're talking about in the passage. Heuristic. So heuristic, if you recall from your content review, it's like something that's like to put it like in simple terms, it's like a mental shortcut we do. So it's like when we're given something like a like like a lot of information, right? It's like when we're trying to make choices, we use a heuristic to make our decisions. So like mental shortcuts, or like when we look at images, we can like make our decisions based on stereotypes we heard, or like kind of like opinions from others to make our decision quickly. And so in this case, this does line up what we're talking about, because they use their self-esteem to assess their social worth. In this way, kind of like a mental shortcut to judge how they are social wise. So it makes the most sense, so I'll keep that. Chunking, it's when we, if you think about it, it's like when we take a complex amount of information and break it into parts. So for example, to give you an example right here, it's this passage. So it's like, it's all this information, right? It's broken into paragraph. It's like chunking. So you break into chunks to focus on one part. And so it's broken into like paragraphs to like, so you can study it one by one instead of everything as a whole together. But chunking does not really have to do with this. It's not like breaking things apart to understand it better. It's rather how a person assesses themselves based on their self-esteem. So it cannot be B, and A is still much stronger answer. Now, stereotype threat, it's like when we are conscious of our race or ethnicity, and then as a result, we do bad on performance, which we were known to be bad at. So, for example, let's say women are known to be bad at math versus men. So, if women are made aware of this, like this type of stereotype, they will more likely perform badly on the math exam compared to men, only when they're conscious of it. But otherwise, this statement wouldn't be true if they didn't know about this, what was happening. So, but the thing is, though, they're not really talking about race or gender, ethnicity at all. They're saying that the self-esteem affects their social worth, and so it has nothing really to do with a social stereotype threat at all. So it cannot be C. Defense mechanism, it's when like if this give you like a picture right here to explain, it's like when we want to repress our like thoughts or unconsciousness. There's all types of these right here, but the passage does not indicate at all like any type of defense mechanism like from the individual. They just say straight up, Okay, they use their self-esteem to assess the social worth. There's nothing being denied at all. There's no defense mechanism, nothing. A still makes the most sense and strongest answer out of B, C, and D. And that is question number 1. All right, question number 2. Which theory is most likely relevant to the sociometer theory? So if we go back in paragraph 1 again, where they talk about this, an individual's self-esteem reflects their history of rejection and acceptance. For example, family and interpersonal relationships is a gauge of social success. Okay, so let's look at our answer choice and see what lines up the most. Trait. So trait, I mean, this is pretty obvious to most of you, so it's kind of like anger, sad, denial, all that feelings. Something that describes us. They really don't describe it, anything like that at all in this last few sentences right here. Um, there really is no like definition of trait being shown, so it cannot be A. B, attachment is like, if you think about PJ's theory, where like, there's different types of attachments as we grow up. They do talk about attachments a bit. They actually say like a history of rejection, acceptance, types of relationships. So yeah, we can say potentially it could be attachment for B. Now let's look at C. Now C is, if we recall from our content review, sprint activation is when like it's like a network of ideas that that are interconnected together. So let's say, for example, I think of a dog, right? Like then that idea of just think about that dog gives gives the spawn of another dog. For example, I think of my dog. I also think of my pet cat, because there's some way my pets, right? So if I think of my dog, I also think of my cat. Just like, I know it's not like the best example, but you get the idea. It's like basically when we think of one thought, another thought pops up. It's just like how they're related and connect to each other. It's like a web. So it cannot be C, because they don't really talk about that. They just say like how we our like interpersonal relationships and our family relationships has nothing to do with relationships at all. It's more like a cognitive way of thinking. And then D, cognitive dissonance. So it's like when we have two conflicting beliefs. I talked about this last passage also. So it's like, to give you the same example, it's when like for example, I smoke, but yet I know that smoking is bad for me, but yet I still do it, and I carry this guilt of like of this huge guilt that, and or this cognitive dissonance, like this contradictory of two beliefs, that something in my way of thinking. So this cannot be D. Reason is because they don't really talk about two contradictory beliefs. Instead, they just talked about rejection, acceptance, and our a way of with interpersonal relationships. And the most sense makes that is with B. So B is our correct answer. And that's question number 2. All right, question number 3. Which construct best describes the overall impact of self-esteem on trade ratings in Table 1? Okay, so here's Table 1 right here. So I always want to look at this paragraph real quickly before I read Table 1. It's always a good habit to read the paragraph before for context. Okay, after reading narratives, participants rated the targets on traits that were relevant or irrelevant to the narrative information. The rating scales ranged from 1 to 7, and they said higher ratings indicated that the target possessed the trait to a greater degree. Some finds were shown below in Table 1. Okay, and so the question was asking which best describes the overall impact of self-esteem. And so they're asking like, you could say what bias or what effect possibly. And so I think the best way to go through tackle this problem is just to go through these answer choices one by one and kind of like debunk them. So let's go through this. So answer choice A, the halo effect. So the halo effect definition is basically when one trait of one person affects the overall trait of the other. So let's say like I'm physically attractive, right? It makes the other traits legible. So like if I'm good at one thing, it makes me good in the other things. And so if you think about it, if someone like if because they were also rating the traits, there's also some stuff as relevant also. For example, physical attractiveness. It could be possible that, you know, there could be bias in that part, because if they thought they're physically attractive, they could leave them to have higher ratings because of that very physical attractiveness. So there could be possibly bias in that. So due to that being possible, I'm gonna keep A for now and move on, and then we'll see what our other answer choices say. So then, hindsight bias, B. So hindsight bias, if you think about it, it means that like, um, I knew something when it happened already. So like for example, I knew this event was gonna happen already, even though like I had no prior information what was gonna happen. So it's like making a assumption that I already knew what happened already, even though I didn't know after it happened already, if that makes sense. But it's kind of like you claim that you knew it's gonna happen even though you didn't know. So hindsight bias though, I really don't see it happening in this experiment already because it's not like the participants are gonna be seeing the scores already. So it isn't making sense to me at all that why it would be hindsight bias. So A so far is stronger than the B. So let's look at the other answer choices. Social facilitation. It's when we perform better on simple tasks when we're like having a crowd with us. But like versus if you have like a if you're doing like a complex task and you have a crowd in front of you, then you're more likely to do better. Question number 4. Conclusions regarding which effects can be made based on table 1. Okay, main effect of target self-esteem, main effect of scholarship condition, interaction effect of target, and scholarship condition. Okay, so let's look at the table 1 quickly over here. So notice that like they kind of made two separate groups, or you can say two independent variables. So meaning that like they don't really interact with each other in some way. They're kind of like their own independent thing. Target self-esteem and scholarship condition, right? And then they had people rate these traits based on like the LSC or HSC. So let's go with our standard answer choices. So what I'm looking for is that something they don't intertwine, they're each independent in their own way. So it says one right here says main effect of target self-esteem, yeah. So these are two like independent. So far I like 1 and 2 because each of them are independent. So I can eliminate 3 because reason why 3 is wrong, because if you read this, this is interaction effect of target self-esteem and scholarship condition. That was not the point of this experiment or the table 1. These are two independent, so even if we get a result from one of them, their interaction has nothing to do with each other, so it cannot be 3. So if you can just eliminate D and B right off the bat because 3 is wrong, and so it has to be C, right? Because we know that 1 and 2 are correct because they're each of their effects are independent and it does affect them because they show significance, right? It's because the main effect is target self-esteem and scholarship condition. You can tell because of the little asterisk sign right here, so you know it's significant for both. So C is the correct answer. Question number 5. Which term best describes the trade ratings collected in study 1? So study 1 was talked about in like in the third and fourth paragraph. They just basically were trying to assess the impact of the target self-esteem and the target's actual academic success. But and then what they did by doing this is by rating, and the way they collect this data was by rating the targets on the traits that are relevant. And so my guess when I look at the answer choices, I know right away what they're talking about. It sounds like a dependent variable. And so let's look at our answer choices. So look at my answer choices right away. I see dependent variable. That's the answer I'm looking for because it's the measure of the outcome based on the independent variable. So I like C so far, but I'm going to explain A, B, and D for the sake of completeness. So let's start with answer A, why it's wrong. Control variable, it's like something where you keep the same. Like it's a control group that's kept the same to compare to the experimental group. So there's no changes added versus the experimental group where changes are added. So you can compare if there's any changes to it. So, but thing is though, trade ratings is a collection of data. It's what we're trying to measure. It's not control. So it cannot be A. It cannot be A. And then B, confounding variable. It's something that we were not made aware of. For example, let's say in an experiment, right? It could be health history, it can be age, it can be gender, it can be small variables that could affect the dependent variables results. So thing is though, however, trade ratings is something that we're trying to measure, not something we were not aware of. So it cannot be B. C, dependent variable, like I already mentioned. Now D variable, I can explain better with a visual right here. So if you look at it, an independent variable is something that's like changed. For example, the amount of water, that's the thing we're changing. And because the amount of water we added affects the dependent variable, it's like what we're trying to measure, like the size of the plant, the number of leaves, living or dead. So something like that, it's like the independent variable, it's what affects the dependent variable as a result what changes. But the thing is, however, trade ratings is something we're trying to measure. The independent variable in this case and from the passage, it'll be something like um, if it was based on either target self-esteem or scholarship condition. It's these types of conditions or independent variables that affect the dependent, in which in this case, it's the traits that are given right here, intelligence, emotional stability, because that's the dependent, right? Because they're given ratings right here. That's what they're trying to measure. And then this right here is the independent because these are the conditions they put in each one of these people in. And so that's why it makes C the correct answer. And that's question number 5. Question number 6 of passage 2, and this is the last and final question. Based on paragraph 2, which phenomenon most likely conflicts with how LSC individuals consider their performance and skills? So if we go back to paragraph 2 where they talk about where LSC individuals report concern that their professional skills and performance may undermine at the workplace because they are less likely than HSE individuals to highlight their performance. So in other words, LSC individuals feel like they're undermined because of their performance because they have low self-esteem. Okay, so let's just go through these answers one by one and see what conflicts with it the most and how they consider their performance and skills. Okay, intersectionality. And so this is something I feel like if I pull another visual right here, this is good to explain it. So it's basically it's when we, take a lot of these things, our sexuality, our racial identity, gender, nationality into like the way we consider ourselves. But however, it's only talking about for the LSC individuals that it's their professional skills and performance. It has nothing to do with really describing about their, you know, any of the following listed, gender, sexuality, racial identity, none of that, right? There's no really intersectionality being intervened at all. So A is not a good answer so far. Multiculturalism is there's like the multiculturalism is basically when like there's the acceptance of like different cultures and races being just multiple cultures being accepted basically. And so as we know from the passage, there's nothing. They have not even talked about that one. So B has nothing to do with that at all. And then ethnocentrism is when we claim that our culture is better than the other person's culture. Basically, um, they're not really saying like, "Hey, my culture is better than yours." They're not really talking about it at all in the passage. So C is not going to answer either. D is the strongest answer, and it's the one that makes the most sense out of A and B and C. And if you think about the definition,